In the heart of New York City stood the gleaming tower of Cross Global, a monument of steel and glass that pierced the sky. At the top floor of this empire, Nathaniel Cross reigned. He was a billionaire whose name was whispered in boardrooms and printed in every financial magazine. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an aura of authority that seemed carved from stone, Nathaniel was the kind of man who commanded silence the moment he entered a room. His reputation was a mixture of awe and fear. Employees said he never smiled, that his heart was as cold as the skyscraper he ruled from. He was the kind of man who never had to raise his voice, because his mere presence was enough to demand obedience. To many, he was a king, to others, a tyrant. But above all, he was untouchable. Far below his world of power, in the buzzing open office on the 12th floor, worked Emily Parker. She was a woman of quiet grace, in her late 20s, with gentle hazel eyes and chestnut hair often tied in a simple knot. Emily had the kind of beauty that was understated, warm rather than dazzling, approachable rather than intimidating. Yet in the ruthless hierarchy of Cross Global, beauty and kindness meant little without power or position. She was a junior assistant in the administrative department, a place so far from the top floor that most days she felt invisible. Emily's days were filled with forgotten coffee orders, endless spreadsheets no one read, and tasks no one else wanted. Colleagues brushed past her without acknowledgement, some even mocking her for being the girl who never climbs. She smiled through it, though deep inside, she carried dreams she never spoke aloud. Her father had once told her, "Emily, the strongest people are often the quietest. They let their actions speak." Those words were the anchor that kept her steady in a world that overlooked her. Life inside Cross Global was like a machine. Meetings rolled on like clockwork, reports stacked endlessly, and the only thing that mattered was results. Nathaniel rarely descended from his high office, but when he did, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The hum of chatter died, footsteps slowed, and every eye turned to him. On one such morning, as he entered the lobby surrounded by a team of advisors, Emily happened to cross his path. She carried a stack of reports taller than her arms could manage. The elevator doors opened, and in her rush to step inside before they closed, the papers slipped. Sheets scattered like snow across the marble floor. Nathaniel stopped. His dark eyes flicked briefly to her, then to the mess at her feet. For a heartbeat, Emily felt the weight of his gaze, sharp, unreadable, like a storm about to break. She expected a word, a gesture, maybe even an order for someone to help. Instead, he stepped past her, entering the elevator without pause. The doors slid shut, leaving Emily crouched on the floor, cheeks burning, heart sinking with humiliation. Her coworkers whispered and chuckled as they walked by. That small moment, insignificant to him, became unforgettable to her. It was not cruelty, but indifference that cut the deepest. Emily realized that to Nathaniel Cross, she was just another face in the building, one of thousands, a shadow in his empire. She gathered the scattered pages with trembling hands, pressing them close to her chest. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel small, but only for a moment. Then she stood, straightened her back, and whispered silently to herself, "One day, they will see me." Yet that day seemed impossibly far away. Nathaniel continued his reign, untouchable and solitary, while Emily carried on unseen. The empire of Cross Global stretched on, built on ambition and iron discipline. What neither of them knew was that beneath the surface of this empire, the seeds of change were already stirring. The man who had everything and the woman who was considered nothing were on a collision course that neither power nor indifference could prevent. And when their worlds finally collided, it would shake the very foundation of everything they thought they knew. The morning sun poured through the glass walls of Cross Global, illuminating the lobby like a cathedral of commerce. Employees rushed in with their briefcases, phones pressed to their ears, each step echoing with the urgency of corporate life. In the center of this storm of ambition, Emily Parker moved quietly, her arms full with yet another tower of documents that no one else wanted to carry. She had grown used to being invisible, a shadow moving through the chaos, unacknowledged by the people who brushed past her. On this particular morning, fate was waiting in the form of a man who had never once noticed her existence. Nathaniel Cross descended from the heavens of the top floor, flanked by his team of executives, their suits pressed, their eyes sharp with calculations. He walked with the stride of a man who owned not just the building, but the city beyond it. Conversations died as he entered the lobby. The air itself seemed to tighten, as if even the walls held their breath in his presence. Emily, balancing her documents and fumbling with her security badge, stepped into the same elevator Nathaniel was approaching. She didn't realize it until too late. The executives moved like a tide, parting around their leader, clearing a path straight into the elevator. Emily, caught in the middle, tried to step aside quickly, but in her rush, the tower of papers slipped from her grasp. The sound of hundreds of pages scattering across the marble floor rang out like a sudden storm. Employees nearby stopped, some with amused smirks, others with thinly veiled disdain. Emily dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather the reports, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She felt the sting of humiliation burning her cheeks, the familiar ache of being the fool in a place where appearances meant everything. And then, she sensed him. Nathaniel Cross. He stopped, his polished shoes inches from the scattered papers. Slowly, she lifted her gaze. For the first time, their eyes met. His were dark, intense, unreadable. In that moment, Emily felt stripped bare, as though he could see not just the clumsy assistant at his feet, but the small, unspoken dreams she had carried all her life. She wanted him to say something, anything. A sharp rebuke, a cold order, even a mocking word. Anything would be better than nothing. But Nathaniel Cross was a man carved from ice. His gaze lingered for a second longer, then he stepped around her without a word, entering the elevator. His executives followed, the doors sliding shut with a soft chime, leaving Emily alone in her humiliation. The lobby stirred back to life, laughter and whispers trailing in her wake as she gathered the last of her papers with trembling fingers. It was not cruelty that cut the deepest, but indifference. Emily knew in that moment what she had always suspected in Nathaniel's world: she did not exist. She was not a name, not a face, not even worth a word. Just another shadow in his empire. As the elevator rose, carrying Nathaniel back to his kingdom above, Emily pressed the stack of papers to her chest and stood tall. Her chestnut hair had fallen loose, her eyes stung with unshed tears, but her spirit did not break. Quietly, beneath the noise of the lobby, she whispered to herself, "One day, they will see me." She didn't know if it was a prayer, a vow, or simply the fragile defiance of a woman who refused to stay invisible forever. What she could not know was that this small moment, this collision of silence and humiliation, was the first thread in a tapestry of destiny. Nathaniel Cross might not have spoken her name that morning, but fate had already begun to write it beside his. The empire of ice and the woman of quiet fire had crossed paths, and nothing would ever be the same again. The empire of Cross Global had always been seen as unshakable. For years, investors had poured money into its ventures, and rivals had been crushed under Nathaniel Cross's relentless drive. But in the quiet corridors of power, storms often gathered unseen. That storm arrived one autumn evening, when Nathaniel stood at the head of a long mahogany table in the boardroom, staring at the sea of pale faces around him. On the screen behind him flashed numbers that told a story darker than words: stock values tumbling, assets under threat, liquidity drying up. The culprit was not a mistake of his own making, but a ruthless adversary, an old rival company that had launched a hostile takeover bid. They had bought up shares silently, stealthily, until the very foundation of Cross Global trembled. Nathaniel's executives shifted uneasily in their seats. Their usual confidence was gone, replaced by nervous whispers and darting eyes. One man cleared his throat, suggesting drastic layoffs. Another murmured about selling off divisions. A third wondered aloud if it was time for Nathaniel to step down and let fresh leadership take the reins. The words hung in the air like daggers. Nathaniel did not flinch, but inside, a rare and unfamiliar sensation coiled in his chest: doubt. For the first time in years, he saw the possibility of losing everything he had built. His empire of steel and glass could crumble, leaving nothing but ashes and headlines. He stood tall, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the air. Cross Global does not fall. Not today, not ever. His words silenced the room, but they did not erase the fear written on every face. He could see Ithis' once loyal generals were already looking for lifeboats while the ship was still afloat. The meeting dragged on with no real solutions, only desperate measures. When it ended, Nathaniel was left in the dim glow of the boardroom, the city lights flickering through the glass wall behind him. He loosened his tie, feeling the weight of the empire pressing down on his shoulders. For years, he had been the man who never faltered, the one others looked to for strength. But tonight, the cracks were showing. Meanwhile, on the 12th floor, Emily Parker worked late, as she often did. She had no idea of the crisis boiling at the top of the tower, though whispers had begun to spread. The air in the office was thick with rumor stock prices dropping, investors pulling out, the king himself cornered. Emily watched her coworkers gossip, some even gloating quietly at the thought of seeing Nathaniel humbled. But Emily felt only unease. She might have been invisible to most, but she understood more than people gave her credit for. Numbers spoke to her, and in the files she handled, she noticed patterns others overlooked: clauses, overlooked contracts, quiet inconsistencies. She didn't know it yet, but buried deep in those dusty files was the key to saving Cross Global. That night, Nathaniel sat alone in his office, staring out at the sprawling city below. The empire he commanded seemed smaller, more fragile than ever before. His reflection in the glass looked back at him, weary, haunted. He had built everything on control, on strength, on the certainty that he could bend the world to his will. Now, forces beyond his control threatened to take it all away. He thought of the people in his company, the ones who feared him, the ones who respected him, and the countless ones who didn't matter enough for him to know by name. For the first time, he wondered if his empire was hollow. What had he built, truly, if the foundation could be stolen in a single move? As the city hummed beneath him, Nathaniel clenched his fists and whispered a vow into the silence: "No one takes Cross Global from me." It was a promise born not of pride, but of desperation, and though he could not know it yet, the answer to his crisis would not come from the men in tailored suits or the boardroom's polished walls. It would come from someone he had never noticed. Someone who had bent down to gather papers at his feet, invisible to the world he ruled. Someone whose quiet strength was about to shine brighter than all his steel and glass. The storm had broken. The empire was on the edge of ruin. And destiny was already preparing the unlikely hand that would pull Nathaniel back from the brink. The following morning at Cross Global began under a heavy cloud. Rumors had transformed into headlines, flashing across televisions in the lobby and glowing on the phones of anxious employees. Cross Global on the brink, the headlines screamed. The once unshakable empire looked vulnerable, and the atmosphere in the building was suffocating. Executives whispered behind closed doors, assistants carried stacks of urgent files, and the sense of doom hung like fog. On the 12th floor, Emily Parker sat at her small desk surrounded by mountains of forgotten paperwork. Her coworkers, buzzing with gossip, barely noticed her. She sifted through an old file archive, papers yellowed at the edges, documents no one had touched for years. It was mindless work assigned to her because no one else wanted to do it. Yet Emily approached even the smallest tasks with quiet diligence. As she turned one page after another, something unusual caught her eye: an old contract buried deep in a folder marked inactive. Her brow furrowed. She leaned closer, tracing the words with her finger. There, written in legal language most people would have skimmed past, was a clause, small, almost hidden, but powerful. It stated that in the event of a hostile takeover attempt, a dormant partnership agreement with a foreign investor could be triggered to block outside acquisition. Emily's heart began to race. She read it again, then a third time, certain she had discovered something extraordinary. It wasn't just a technicality, it was a shield, a lifeline. With this clause, Cross Global could halt the takeover entirely. But who would listen to her? She was the assistant no one respected, the girl who spilled papers in the lobby, the invisible employee in an empire built on giants. Still, she knew she couldn't stay silent. The company was collapsing, and if no one acted, thousands of jobs including her own would vanish. She clutched the contract tightly, gathering her courage. With trembling hands and pounding heart, she left her desk and made her way toward the top floor, a place she had never dared to approach. Upstairs, the boardroom was filled with chaos. Nathaniel Cross stood at the head of the table, his voice low but firm, while his executives shouted over one another, panic spilling into every word. Desperation colored their suggestions: cut losses, sell assets, surrender control. The empire was crumbling before their eyes. The heavy doors creaked open, and heads turned. There stood Emily, clutching a worn file to her chest. For a moment, silence filled the room. Murmurs rose. What was she doing here? An assistant? In the middle of a war council? Some chuckled, others sneered, but Emily forced herself to step forward. "You found something," she began, her voice small but steady. She laid the contract on the table, flipping it open with careful hands. "There's a clause in this partnership agreement. It's still valid. If it's executed, the hostile takeover can be blocked immediately." The room erupted with scoffs and dismissive laughter. "Ridiculous," one executive muttered. "She doesn't even belong here," another sneered. The sound of derision stung, but Emily kept her gaze fixed on Nathaniel. For the first time, his eyes truly studied her, not as the girl who picked up papers, not as an invisible shadow, but as someone holding something that might matter. He reached for the file, scanning the clause quickly. His sharp mind, trained to slice through deals and contracts, caught the truth instantly. His expression shifted, just barely, but enough for Emily to see she had been right. "This changes everything," Nathaniel said at last, his deep voice cutting through the noise. The executives fell silent, stunned that he had spoken in her defense. Nathaniel looked up, his gaze locked on Emily, as if seeing her for the very first time. Emily exhaled, relief flooding her chest. For once, she was not invisible. For once, her voice mattered. She had stepped into a room where she didn't belong, and she had changed the course of the empire. In that moment, Emily Parker, the woman no one respected, became the invisible savior of Cross Global, and though she could not yet see it, the thread of destiny had tightened between her and Nathaniel Cross, pulling them toward a future neither of them could have imagined. The empire had been saved not by power, not by wealth, but by the quiet courage of a woman no one thought capable of anything at all. The crisis had been halted. With the contract clause Emily Parker discovered, Cross Global had fended off the hostile takeover, at least for now. In the days that followed, the company stabilized, investors breathed easier, and Nathaniel Cross returned to the image of the untouchable titan. Yet though the empire had been saved, a new storm brewed, not in numbers, not in contracts, but in reputation. The world was watching. Headlines praised the rescue but whispered about the weakness it revealed. Cross Global survives, but for how long? Investors demanded not just financial strength, but stability of character. They wanted a Nathaniel who was more than steel and ice. They wanted humanity. Nathaniel knew it. Sitting alone in his penthouse office, he looked out over the skyline, the city glittering like shards of glass. For years, he had built his life on power and fear. Now, that image was cracking. In the court of public opinion, he was the ruthless king who had nearly lost his empire. If he was to silence the doubters and rebuild confidence, he needed more than business strategy needed to change the story. And that was when his gaze fell on the file Emily had brought to his office earlier that day. She had been summoned quietly, thanked discreetly. Yet her presence lingered in his mind. The girl no one respected had done what an army of advisors could not. He remembered her standing in the boardroom, trembling yet defiant, her voice cutting through a sea of derision. She was not polished, not powerful, but she had something rare: authenticity. Nathaniel tapped his pen against the desk, his mind weaving a plan. Investors demanded humanity? The press wanted warmth? Then he would give them a spectacle they could not ignore. A marriage. Not to a socialite or heiress that would reek of calculation. No, it had to be someone unexpected. Someone who embodied sincerity, someone the public could believe in. Someone like Emily Parker. When Emily was called into his office again, she expected to be dismissed, perhaps thanked politely, then sent back to her forgotten desk. Instead, she found Nathaniel standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, his silhouette framed by the city lights. He turned, his expression as unreadable as ever, and gestured for her to sit. "I owe you my company," he said simply, his voice low and steady. Emily blinked, unsure how to respond. Gratitude was not something she expected from a man like him. She opened her mouth, but he continued. "But cross-global survival is not just about contracts. It is about perception. My investors, my board, the world, they need to see stability. Humanity. Commitment." Emily frowned, not understanding. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Cross." He studied her, his gaze sharp but not unkind. "I need a wife, Miss Parker. At least, that is what they need to see." The words struck her like a thunderclap. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. "A wife," she whispered. "A marriage," Nathaniel said, his tone calm, deliberate. "A union that shows the world I am more than a ruthless businessman. It must be convincing. It must be real in appearance, if not in truth." "And you?" His eyes lingered on her, piercing through her confusion. "You are perfect for it." Emily's heart pounded. She wanted to laugh, to cry, to refuse. She was an assistant, invisible in his empire. And now, this man, this billionaire, was proposing marriage? Not out of love, but out of strategy. She shook her head, overwhelmed. "This is insane." "Why me?" "You could choose anyone. Someone from your world." "Someone who, because no one would believe them," Nathaniel interrupted, his voice firm. "But you, Emily Parker, the woman who saved Cross Global, the woman who is ordinary, sincere, and untouched by this world's politics, people will believe in you. They will believe in us." The room was silent but for the hum of the city beyond the glass. Emily stared at him, torn between disbelief and a strange pull she could not explain. To marry Nathaniel Cross, even if only in name, would change her life forever. It was absurd. It was impossible. And yet, the way he looked at her made it feel inevitable. Nathaniel stepped closer, his presence commanding, his words like steel wrapped in velvet. "This will not be forever. A year, perhaps 2. You will be protected. Compensated. And when it is over, you may walk away with more than you came with. But right now, Miss Parker, I need you. And so does this company." Emily swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She thought of her small desk, her unnoticed life, her father's words about letting actions speak. She thought of the company she had saved, of the faces of coworkers who depended on their paychecks. And for the first time, she wondered if fate had placed her here for a reason larger than herself. Her voice trembled, but her resolve began to form. "If I say yes," she whispered, "this has to mean something. Not just a performance for the cameras. If I am to stand beside you, I will not be invisible." Nathaniel's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. For a brief second, the mask of the ruthless billionaire slipped, and Emily glimpsed the man beneath, the man who, perhaps, wanted more than a business arrangement. He extended his hand, steady and sure. "Then say yes, Emily Parker. And together, we will rewrite both our stories." The wedding of Nathaniel Cross and Emily Parker was never meant to be a fairy tale. It was crafted, planned down to the last detail by publicists and event coordinators, designed to dazzle investors and silence critics. Yet on that bright Saturday morning, as the doors of St. Augustine's Cathedral opened, the world gasped as though witnessing the most romantic love story of the decade. Reporters crowded the steps, their cameras flashing like lightning. Socialites whispered in disbelief. An assistant, one woman sneered. She came from nowhere, another marveled. But the pictures told a different story. Emily Parker, radiant in a gown of ivory satin, her chestnut hair woven into a crown of soft curls, walked down the aisle as though she had always belonged there. Her hazel eyes, though trembling with nerves, held quiet strength. To those watching, she looked like a woman in love. At the altar stood Nathaniel, the image of power in a tailored black tuxedo. His posture was regal, his expression unreadable. To the world, he was the billionaire finally tamed, his cold empire softened by the touch of love. Yet inside, Nathaniel's thoughts were not of strategy or investors. They were on the woman approaching him, this ordinary assistant who had somehow stepped into his extraordinary world. The ceremony unfolded with grandeur. Candles flickered in golden sconces. A choir filled the cathedral with hymns that seemed to reach heaven itself. Emily's hands trembled as she placed them in Nathaniel's. The priest's voice echoed solemnly, but beneath the ritual lay the weight of unspoken truths. This was a marriage of convenience, a contract dressed in lace and vows. And yet, as Nathaniel looked into Emily's eyes, he saw no pretense, only sincerity. When the time came for the vows, Emily's voice quivered, but each word carried warmth that pierced through the coldest walls Nathaniel had built around himself. She spoke not as an actress in a performance, but as a woman who understood the gravity of promises. Nathaniel repeated his lines with flawless composure, yet something shifted inside him as he heard his own voice speak words of forever. Then came the moment. "You may kiss the bride." The world leaned in, cameras poised. It was supposed to be nothing more than a gesture, a symbol for the press. Nathaniel bent down, Emily lifted her face, and their lips met. But the kiss lingered. For a heartbeat too long, it was not performance but reality. A spark, unexpected, undeniable, passed between them. When they pulled away, the cathedral erupted with applause, but Nathaniel's heart beat with confusion. For the first time in years, he felt something he could not control. The reception was lavish, held in the grand ballroom of the cross tower. Crystal chandeliers cast light across marble floors, champagne flowed freely, and the city's elite watched the new couple with fascination. Emily, though overwhelmed, moved with grace. She smiled politely, thanked strangers, and played her part with quiet dignity. But when Nathaniel's hand brushed hers during the first dance, she felt the same spark that had ignited at the altar. Their steps moved in rhythm, not just for show but with something deeper neither dared name. Guests whispered of how beautiful they looked together, how genuine their smiles seemed. And though Emily knew it was all a facade, her heart betrayed her. She caught herself watching Nathaniel when he wasn't looking, wondering about the man behind the mask. He, too, found his gaze drifting to her, puzzled by the warmth she stirred in him. As the evening ended, fireworks lit the night sky above the tower. Reporters declared the wedding a triumph, investors relaxed, and the world believed in the story of Nathaniel Cross and Emily Parker. Yet behind closed doors, in the quiet of the limousine that carried them away, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, charged with unspoken questions. Finally, Emily turned, her voice soft. "That kiss, it wasn't supposed to feel real." Nathaniel's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the city lights rushing past. After a long pause, he whispered, "No, it wasn't." They sat in silence again, but the truth lingered. Their marriage may have been written as fiction, a staged tale for the cameras. Yet something very real had taken root that neither of them could deny. That night, as Emily lay in a guest room of Nathaniel's penthouse, staring at the glittering skyline, she realized her life had changed forever. She was no longer the invisible assistant. She was the billionaire's bride, only in name. But deep in her heart, she wondered, could something true be born from something false? Nathaniel, alone in his room, wondered the same. The wedding was fake. But the spark? That was real. And it was only the beginning. The days after the wedding were a blur of appearances, photographs, and carefully crafted narratives. Nathaniel Cross and Emily Parker became the city's newest obsession. Their faces appeared on magazine covers, their story dissected on morning shows. To the public, it was a whirlwind romancian, untouchable billionaire who had finally found love in the most unexpected place. The truth, however, was far more complicated. Emily found herself swept into a life she had never imagined. One day she was an invisible assistant, the next she was the wife of one of the wealthiest men in America. She attended charity galas, sat beside Nathaniel in business dinners, and posed for photographers as though she had always belonged in the spotlight. At first, it felt like walking through a dream, one that wasn't hers. Every gown she wore, every flash of a camera, reminded her this was supposed to be an arrangement, a performance to stabilize Cross Global. And yet, when Nathaniel offered his arm at each event, when his hand brushed hers during the staged smiles, the lines between pretend and real began to blur. Nathaniel, too, felt the shift. He had entered the marriage with calculation, certain he could control the story and the woman beside him. But Emily was not like anyone he had ever known. She spoke with warmth at charity events, not from a script but from her heart. She listened to strangers, remembered their names, and made people feel seen, something Nathaniel himself had never mastered. Investors who had once doubted him now praised his choice of a wife, remarking on how genuine she seemed. Nathaniel knew it wasn't strategy on her part, it was simply who she was. And it unsettled him. At one fundraiser for children's hospitals, Emily knelt to speak with a young boy in a wheelchair. Cameras captured the moment, but Nathaniel, standing in the background, noticed something no lens could: the way Emily's eyes softened, the way the boy's face lit up with joy. For the first time, Nathaniel wondered if this marriage meant to be a facade was revealing something real inside himself, something he had buried long ago. Their private life was no less complicated. In the penthouse, Emily tried to keep to her guest room, maintaining boundaries. Yet late at night, they often crossed paths in the kitchen or library, where the masks of husband and wife slipped away. One evening, Emily found Nathaniel staring at an old photograph of his parents. She hesitated, then asked softly, "Do you miss them?" He did not answer immediately, but the silence itself spoke volumes. Finally, in a voice far gentler than she had ever heard, he said, "Every day." It was the first crack in his armor, the first time she glimpsed the man behind the empire. For Emily, these moments stirred something she could not ignore. She had entered the marriage determined to remain detached, to remind herself it was all temporary. But the more she saw of Nathaniel, not the CEO, not the ruthless billionaire, but the man who carried silent grief, the more her heart betrayed her resolve. She began to look forward to his presence, to the rare smiles that broke through his stern exterior, to the quiet conversations that stretched late into the night. The world continued to believe in their love story. Investors relaxed, Cross Global's reputation soared, and reporters declared their marriage a symbol of hope in cynical times. But within the walls of the penthouse, something truer was unfolding. Their staged romance had become a stage for vulnerability, for connection, for the beginnings of real affection. Yet both Nathaniel and Emily hesitated to name it. Pride, fear, and the weight of their arrangement kept them silent. They told themselves it was still pretend, still part of the performance. And yet, every stolen glance, every lingering touch, whispered otherwise. The night Emily realized how deep she had fallen came unexpectedly. She had attended another gala, exhausted by the endless scrutiny of flashing cameras. When they returned home, Nathaniel noticed her silence and asked if she was all right. She met his gaze, her hazel eyes shimmering with something unspoken, and for a fleeting moment, she wanted to tell him the truth that she no longer knew where the act ended and where her heart began. But instead, she simply whispered, "I'm fine." Nathaniel didn't press, but the way his hand lingered on her shoulder told her he sensed the truth. Between pretend and real, they were trapped in a delicate dance. Both afraid to step forward, both unwilling to step back. And though the world celebrated their union as a beautiful love story, neither of them could yet admit what was happening, that the marriage they built on lies was slowly becoming the most truthful thing in their lives. The marriage of Nathaniel Cross and Emily Parker had turned Cross Global's fortunes around. Investors who once doubted were now reassured, the press called it a miracle love story, and the empire stood taller than ever. But in the shadows, enemies watched, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It began with whispers. A leaked story on an online blog questioned the authenticity of their marriage. Too sudden, the article sneered. Too convenient. The writer hinted that Emily Parker was nothing more than a pawn, an assistant plucked from obscurity to polish Nathaniel's image. Soon, more stories appeared, anonymous sources claiming Emily had manipulated her way into power, that she was ambitious, opportunistic, undeserving of her place beside him. The whispers grew into headlines. Morning shows replayed images of their wedding, slowing down the kiss, analyzing every gesture. Talk show hosts speculated whether Nathaniel truly loved her or whether she was just the pretty face he needed to keep investors happy. Emily's past was dragged into the light. Every old neighbor, every former classmate, anyone with a story, even false ones, was given a microphone. "She's just a secretary," one bitter voice said. "She wanted this all along." At the office, Emily felt the shift. Coworkers who once envied her now looked at her with disdain. Some mocked her behind her back, others openly questioned her. "Did you plan this from the start?" one executive sneered. The hurt cut deeper than she expected. She had never wanted the spotlight, never asked for this life. Yet here she was, painted as a fraud. One evening, after a particularly brutal article claimed she had seduced Nathaniel for money, Emily locked herself in her room, tears streaming down her face. She whispered to herself, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here." For the first time since their marriage, she considered leaving. She thought of her small apartment, her old life of invisibility. It suddenly seemed easier, safer, than enduring the storm of lies. But Nathaniel saw what was happening. He saw the pain in Emily's eyes, the way her shoulders drooped under the weight of ridicule. And something inside him snapped. He had built his empire on control, but this was about protecting the woman who had saved him, the woman who had become far more than a contract. The breaking point came during a shareholder meeting streamed live. A journalist, bold and cruel, stood up and asked Nathaniel directly, "Mr. Cross, do you expect us to believe this marriage is real? Or is your wife just a convenient prop in your empire?" The room went silent. Cameras flashed. All eyes turned to Nathaniel. For a moment, Emily's heart sank, afraid of what he might say. She braced herself for silence, for dismissal, for him to protect the company by distancing himself from her. Instead, Nathaniel stood. His voice, low and steady, carried the weight of steel and fire. "Emily Parker is not a prop. She is the woman who saved this company when all of you failed. She is the one who stood by me when others only looked to abandon ship. And she is my wife not because of contracts or cameras, but because I chose her. And I would choose her again." The room erupted. Some applauded, others sat stunned, but the message was clear. Nathaniel Cross, the man known for his cold heart, had spoken with passion, with conviction. He had chosen Emily not as strategy, not as facade, but as truth. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not from pain. For the first time, she felt what it meant to be truly seen, not as an assistant, not as a pawn, but as a partner. That night, as they left the meeting together, Nathaniel took her hand in front of the cameras. His grip was firm, protective, unyielding. The world saw it as a show of unity. But Emily knew, deep down, it was something more. The rival's revenge had failed. The storm of rumors had only revealed a deeper truth. Nathaniel Cross and Emily Parker, once strangers bound by convenience, had begun to fight for each other not as a performance, but as something real. And though more battles lay ahead, Emily felt a quiet strength rise within her. For the first time, she no longer whispered to herself that one day people would see her. She knew now they already did. In the weeks after Nathaniel Cross publicly defended Emily Parker, something in their marriage shifted forever. The world still speculated, but Emily no longer flinched at every headline. She walked taller now, knowing Nathaniel had chosen to stand by her when he could have stayed silent. For Nathaniel, the moment he had declared Emily as his wife, not a prop, not a performance, but a choice, haunted him in the best way. He had spoken the words for the cameras, yes, but deep in his chest he knew they were true. Late nights in the penthouse became different. Emily no longer kept to her guest room as strictly. She would wander into the library while Nathaniel worked, curling up with a book across from him. At first, silence filled the space, but soon silence gave way to conversation. She asked him about his childhood, about his first business deal, about the nights when the weight of the empire felt unbearable. To his own surprise, he answered. He told her about the father who demanded perfection, the mother who tried to soften his world but left too soon, the endless pursuit of success that never seemed to quiet the loneliness inside him. Emily listened, not with judgment, not with pity, but with understanding. She told him stories of her own growing up in a small town, working nights to put herself through school, caring for her ailing father. Nathaniel realized then that strength did not always roar. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and carried in the heart of a woman who refused to give up. One evening, as rain lashed against the glass walls of the penthouse, Emily stood by the window, watching the city blur into streaks of silver. Nathaniel joined her, his presence tall and protective beside her. She turned, her hazel eyes soft, and whispered, "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to live without all this? Without the company, the money, the pressure?" Nathaniel's eyes lingered on her face. "Every day," he admitted. "But I never thought I could." Emily smiled faintly. "Maybe you don't have to do it alone." The words hung in the air, heavier than the storm outside. For the first time in his life, Nathaniel felt what it meant to want not power, not victory, but someone. He wanted her. Not because of strategy, not because of duty, but because she had become the only truth in a world of facades. The realization came fully during a charity event in Chicago. Emily was giving a speech, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger as she spoke about hope, resilience, and the importance of helping one another. Nathaniel stood in the audience, watching as people leaned in, captivated. And then he felt it, clear and undeniable, he loved her. The man who had built an empire on cold logic had been undone by the warmth of one woman's heart. That night, back in their hotel suite, Nathaniel could no longer keep silent. He found Emily on the balcony, her hair dancing in the night breeze. "Emily," he said, his voice low but sure. She turned, startled by the rawness in his tone. "I entered this marriage for all the wrong reasons," Nathaniel confessed. "For strategy, for control. But somewhere along the way, I stopped pretending. You're not just my wife for the world. You are my wife because I want you to be. I love you." Emily's breath caught in her throat. For weeks, she had battled her own heart, telling herself it was all performance, that she must not fall for him. But hearing the words from his lips shattered the last of her defenses. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "I love you too, Nathaniel. I think I always have, even when I tried not to." He crossed the balcony, pulling her into his arms, holding her as though he would never let go. The city lights glowed around them, but neither saw anything beyond each other. In that embrace, the empire, the rumors, the contracts, all of it vanished. What remained was something no money could buy, no rival could steal: love, pure and true. From that night forward, their marriage was no longer a contract. It was no longer pretend. It was real. And both Nathaniel and Emily knew they had crossed a threshold from which there was no turning back. The realization of love had come, quietly but powerfully, and it bound them more tightly than any vow spoken in a cathedral. In the months that followed Nathaniel Cross's confession of love to Emily Parker, everything began to change, not just within their marriage, but within the empire itself. Cross Global, once teetering on the brink of collapse, now surged forward with renewed strength. Investors who had doubted Nathaniel now praised him for his vision and, surprisingly, for his humanity. They saw not just a powerful businessman but a man transformed by love. Emily, once invisible in the vast halls of the company, became a quiet symbol of resilience. Employees who used to mock her now treated her with respect, remembering that it was her discovery, her courage, that had saved them all from ruin. The city, too, changed its view. Where once the tabloids had sneered, they now celebrated. Magazine covers painted Nathaniel and Emily as proof that true love could be found in the most unexpected places. Their story was told as a modern fairy tale: the billionaire and the assistant who became not only his wife but his partner in life. And while Nathaniel disliked attention, he could not deny the pride he felt seeing Emily shine in the world's eyes. But the greatest change was not in headlines or boardrooms. It was in the quiet moments. Nathaniel no longer returned to an empty penthouse filled only with shadows of ambition. Now, when he came home, Emily was there, her laughter in the kitchen, her voice humming softly in the library, her hand slipping into his as they watched the city lights together. He had lived for years in a fortress of glass and steel, but now, for the first time, it felt like home. Emily, too, found a new strength. She had once whispered to herself that one day people would see her. Now, she no longer needed to whisper. She was seen not because of her title or her marriage, but because of her courage, her kindness, her heart. She carried herself with quiet confidence, knowing she had earned her place beside Nathaniel not by chance, but by choice. One crisp autumn evening, Nathaniel planned something he had never thought he would. He arranged a private ceremony, not for cameras, not for investors, but for themselves. At a small chapel outside the city, with only a handful of close friends, Nathaniel and Emily stood before one another once more. There were no reporters, no flashing lights, only the soft glow of candles and the sound of their vows spoken from the heart. This time, Nathaniel's voice trembled as he said, "I vow to love you, Emily, not because the world asks it of me, but because my heart belongs to you. For richer or poorer, in triumph or in failure, I will stand by you. Always." Emily's hazel eyes shimmered with tears as she whispered, "And I vow to love you, Nathaniel, not for what you own or what you've built, but for who you are. You are my home, my partner, my forever." When they kissed, there were no cameras to capture it. And yet, it was the truest moment of all. Cross Global thrived in the years to come, not just as a company of profit, but as a company of purpose. Emily took on a role in the foundation arm, championing education and healthcare projects, reminding Nathaniel that wealth meant little without giving back. Together, they became not just symbols of success, but of hope. And though challenges would always come as they do in every life, every love, Nathaniel and Emily faced them together, hand in hand. He, the man of steel and fire, and she, the woman of quiet strength, had found in each other the one thing neither had ever expected: a love that turned the coldest empire into something warm, lasting, and real. So when people spoke of Nathaniel Cross and Emily Parker, they did not just speak of power or wealth. They spoke of love, unexpected, improbable, but true. The assistant who was once invisible had become the heart of the empire, and the billionaire who was once untouchable had finally been touched by the one woman who changed everything. Their story did not end with headlines or contracts. It lived on in every sunrise they shared, in every step they walked together, in every vow renewed not with words but with life itself. For Nathaniel and Emily, happily ever after was not a fairy tale. It was their truth.